Despond. We talked about it a little bit last week. We're going to continue this week. Now, what do you guys remember so far about our story? Where's Christian at? When did he become a Christian? When did he get the name, anyways? And where is he at in his walk so far? What do you guys remember so far in the last 2 weeks?
He's in the plain.
He's in the middle of the plain.
The city of destruction. He's headed toward the wicket gate.
Good. He's heading towards the light, anyways. He knows that there's a gate somewhere over there, and he's just heading in that general direction. Now, as he goes, what's happened along the way? Because remember we said he's heading out into the middle of the plain, and we said that expression was used of Lot as he went into the plain of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So he's heading out into the world. He's taking this leap of faith, if you will. He's leaving the city of destruction. He's heading out to the wicket gate. He hasn't made it to the wicket gate, right? So we're talking about a pre-salvation Christian. He knows the truth, but he hasn't actually put his faith in the truth yet. If that makes sense, okay? So he's trying there. He's in the world. He's trying to make progress. And this section, now we're going to see it over days, of course, but the idea is this is a lot of the things that could happen to a Christian as they try to come to faith, as they start to believe. Now remember, this is important. Bunyan was a firm believer in God's sovereignty, okay? But the Pilgrim's Progress is written primarily from the viewpoint of what can happen in this world. It's a horizontal view with a vertical background, if you want to look at it that way. He never forgets who the Lord is and how in control God is in. At the same time, how does it look to a believer in time, in the limited sphere that he can see? Right? Because we see a lot of things happen that we know that God knows all these things. He's brought them all to pass. But from our standpoint right now, in the things that we can see, in the time that we're at, with the situations that we're in, what does it look like? Does that make sense? So in the same way, Christian's walking in this plain, he's going to get visited by a bunch of challenges, and that's all he sees. What does it look like for a Christian to walk? What does it look like for a Christian to experience it? Not, is God in control? That's true. But Bunyan's question is, what does it look like for a pilgrim to progress? Does that make sense? So, in this sense, he's walked. Now, what has he encountered so far in the beginning of his walk?
Wife and children urging him to come back.
Good. And what else?
Obstinate and pliable.
Obstinate and pliable. Well, obstinate so far. We'll talk about pliable today. What was obstinate all about? Remember? What does obstinate mean?
He won't change his mind.
He won't change his mind. So we've encountered a couple different challenges to Christian's faith. Why does some people want him to stop? One is obstinate. Obstinate just doesn't want anything to change. He's stuck, right? Now think about the family situation. Why don't they want him to change? We talked about this. Are people, when they come up against a Christian who's investigating the faith, is everyone just militant and decisive about telling a Christian to stop their walk? Is it always that much of an affront? Do people just come up into your face, put a finger into your chest and say, stop following the faith? Is that the way it works? No, sometimes it's a little more subtle than that, isn't it? Sometimes the challenges aren't necessarily these upfront, in-your-face challenges. Sometimes they're much more subtle. Would you agree? Because think about this. When Jesus said nobody turns his head after he puts his head to the plowshare, what is he saying? That there's someone there twisting your head to turn backwards? Or what's the challenge? Why would you turn your head? What do you think? Why did Jesus have to give that warning? You get distracted, keep going.
With things that grab your attention?
Yes, because Why do they grab your attention? They're tempting. What makes something tempting?
You think they might be better than what you have and where you're going?
Yeah, keep going with that. What makes something tempting? If I pick up a handful of mud, and I know the kids sometimes think this is really cool, but if then they bring you the mud or they bring you the grasshopper that they just caught in the yard, how excited are they? Very excited. How excited are you? Why not?
Because we're familiar with the result.
And it has no value. So what makes something tempting?
It has value at the time.
It has something to you, right? That's why temptations come in all forms. It doesn't have to be money, power, sex. It could be family. It could be children. It could be 1,000 other things, right? Temptations come in 1,000 different forms. And we'll see this when we get to vanity and Vanity's Fair. That's exactly what life is all about, okay? But right now, you got to understand, temptation comes from family. It comes from neighbors. It comes from outright rejection. And now we're going to see that it also comes from more subtle forms of people that look like they really are interested, but they're not necessarily super interested, if that makes sense. Can you go find Clint and ask him to stop the guitar? Just tell him it's kind of noisy.
Jason playing the guitar?
Yeah, just find Clint and tell him it's really kind of noisy if he could calm things down.
He's right over there.
Oh, he was talking to...
All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to jump in the notes now, and they'll probably be here for 2 weeks, just FYI. So keep your notes, or you can leave them here, and then we'll use them next week as well. But the Slough of Despond. Now I saw in my dream that when Obstinate was gone back, Christian and Pliable went talking over the plain. So there's our setting. And thus they began their discourse. Christian says, "Come, neighbor Pliable, how do you do? I am glad you are persuaded to go along with me. Had even Obstinate himself but felt what I have felt of the powers and terrors of what is yet unseen, he would not thus lightly have given us the back. He would not have turned his back upon us." So, given that, what do we see as Christian's main motivation right at the moment? Right? He said, "Pliable, how do you do? Let me volunteer how I'm doing." Right? What characterizes Christian's mindset at the moment?
Wanting to tell the good news.
Oh, yeah, that's what it sounded like.
Got a friend. Somebody with him.
He's got somebody with him. Just stick with real quick. What does it say? If he had felt what I had felt. We'll get to the gladness in a second. We'll talk about that too. But what is his mindset? What is his main motivation at this point?
Fear.
Fear. Look what he said. If he had felt what I have felt of the powers and terrors of what is yet unseen. Right? So is Christian running towards something? Or is he mainly running away from something? You see where he's going? This is why when we said he has the name Christian, he's not necessarily a believing Christian yet because he doesn't know what he's running to. He knows that there is a solution. He knows that there's hope somewhere out there, but he doesn't know what's really there yet. Okay? So to everyone else, he looks like a Christian. He's on that journey. He's acting like a Christian. He's talking in a lot of ways like a Christian, but he's still missing key parts. Okay? And when we get to the Slough, that's what's going to matter. So I'm telling you that for a reason. Okay? So, Pliable says, "Come, neighbor Christian, since there is none but us here, let us tell me now further what things are and how to be enjoyed whither we are going." All right. Now let's just contrast that really quickly. Christian says, if he had felt the terrors that I have seen, or that I have felt but are yet unseen. Now, you hear that. And what is Pliable's response?
Jason, just to clarify, I'm sorry I must be slow on the uptake. Christian is called Christian, but he is not a Christian.
That's the question. So last week he started off with no name.
That's uncertain. Okay.
Yeah, he started off with no name, and then last week was the first time that we actually got to refer to him as Christian. And it was once he started his journey, when Obstinate and Pliable came to him, they said, that's when Bunyan said, for his name is Christian. We'll find out that his name is actually graceless. He'll explain that later. So right now, his name is Christian, but he doesn't have a believing faith yet. Make sense? Okay. So let's just contrast. Christian says if he had felt the power of the fear, the powers and terrors of what is yet unseen. That's what I feel, right? Now, what was Pliable's response to that?
Tell me what can be enjoyed. Tell me what can be enjoyed.
Right. Tell me what can be enjoyed. So now let's compare and contrast.
What's largely ignoring any negative consequences. He just wants to know the good things.
Right? Do you guys see that? Pliable is not concerned with the terrors. Now, why wouldn't Pliable be concerned with the terrors?
He hasn't felt them.
He hasn't felt them. And therefore,
They're not real.
not real. I don't see them. Where's the error? Where's the issue? Let's forget all that stuff. That's all great stuff. Let's move on. Tell me about the good things. Tell me about the good things, right? Pliable is not concerned. They just kind of like water off a duck's back. They just rinse right off. He doesn't even think about them because he doesn't have any concerns of his own. There's no real terror in him because there's no real danger to him.
Is it because there's two of them?
Two of who?
Two characters together?
Oh, it could be, except for where does Christian get his terror from, as we've seen in earlier? From the book. What have we noticed? The Pliable has nothing. So we'll keep reading, right? Come neighbor Christian, tell me all the good things. So this is what Christian says. I can better conceive of them with my mind than speak of them with my tongue. But yet, since you are desirous to know, I will read of them in my book. And Pliable says this, and do you think the words of your book are certainly true? Yes, verily, for it was made by him that cannot lie. Now, there's a lot in there, okay? First of all, where does Christian turn to get his description of heaven? And to get his burden, and to get everything else? Well, he's got this book in his hand. And then Pliable says, are you sure about what? Not the book. Your book. What does that tell you about Pliable?
It's not his book.
It's not his. So even though he's walking with Christian, even though he's going towards the wicket gate, even though he's talking of heaven, he does not have a book. And without a book, you can't have a burden. And without a burden, what are you leaving from? Nothing. And what are you running towards? Nothing. Whatever you make up. Does that make sense? So Pliable clearly does not understand what's going on. Christian has a book that God's opened up and faced his heart with that conviction of what he's truly like and what God's truly like and holiness and justice. And that's all he sees right now. But we also know that the gospel is also in those pages. And we'll see that eventually. Pliable has none of that. So Pliable is as quickly going to pick it up as he is going to drop it because there's nothing really there. If that makes sense. Now, that being said, what do we also see about Christian? About this book? What are we observing about him? He knows it's true, which is telling you either consciously or subconsciously, this book has become incredibly reliable to him. Now, he's faced with terrors and fears and all that kind of stuff, but what can he not stop doing? Reading his book. There's something about that irresistible grace. There's something about the character of God that he cannot resist. And so he keeps grabbing onto it. He can't not read. Because there's something else in this book. Okay? Now, the other thing is, and this is a little bit more subtle, it may not jump out at us. Christian says this, I could conceive better with my mind and speak of with my tongue, but since you are desirous to know, I will read of them in my book. Now, put yourselves in the 1600s. Okay? About 100 years earlier, we had Martin Luther, and about 100 years before that, what came about that changed the Western world? The printing press, which allowed us to make multiple copies of the Bible. Now, Protestant Reformation comes, and all of a sudden, what's encouraged? Reading your Bible. Was that always a given? No. For a long time, people weren't literate enough to know, period. Most priests were not literate enough to know. Then once they were literate, they weren't necessarily able to learn Latin, and Latin was the only official language that you could read the Bible. That's all breaking down in Bunyan's time. So when he picks this up and he says, I will read of them in my book, that means Christian is carrying his own personal copy of the Bible. There's a subtle lesson in that. Bunyan saw this, and this is the fruit of the Reformation, as people, anyone, any person's opportunity to open their Bible and see God. No longer did you need a priest. No longer did you need a pope. This is your opportunity. Now, this isn't saying Bunyan saying you don't need teachers or anything else. You can just do it all yourself. The Spirit will give you knowledge. That's unscriptural, right? Paul says he's given prophets and teachers and evangelists and so on for different purposes. So that's not what Bunyan's saying. What Bunyan is saying is that this, your Bible and your reading, can be personal. You no longer need to go to a church and participate in a mass to have any hope with God. You open your Bible and see what it says. Yourself. Okay? So that's a really, actually, it doesn't come out that way to us because, I've got an electronic copy, I've got 4 copies of the Bible, everyone has it, we throw it on our pews. When they kind of get ratty, we just go ahead and buy a new one. That wasn't the case here, right? This was a big deal for his time. So, a little bit subtle, but very important. So Pliable doesn't have the book. So Pliable says, well said. What things are they? Okay, now Christian's going to go through a series of things, and these are all important, and if we have time, we go look up all the scripture that goes behind them, but just understand these are a summary of a number of different passages. Christian says, there is an endless kingdom to be inhabited, an everlasting life to be given us, that we may inhabit that kingdom forever. Get that from John 10. Pliable says, well said. What else? There are crowns of glory to be given us, and garments that will make us shine like the sun in the firmament of heaven. Okay? That's from 2 Timothy, Revelation. That is very pleasant. And what else? There shall be no crying, nor sorrow, for he that is owner of the place will wipe all tears from our eyes. And what company shall we have there? Okay? Now, let's look at Pliable's understanding. Look at the responses that we're getting from Pliable. Wow, that sounds cool. Wow, that was pleasant. Hey, who else is going to be there? How is this being received?
He's not very engaged because,
Yeah.
if you just heard about an endless kingdom that you inhabit forever, the very first thing, then, okay, let's ask more questions. Let's dig deeper.
Right.
What does that mean? How do we live forever?
Right.
If he were actually having some buy-in, then he would latch on and ask questions back instead of just, okay, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't seem to have much of a buy-in. There's kind of it's hitting him, but it's not necessarily sinking in, right? There's no more questions being asked. There's no more investigation. It's kind of like, oh, that's really cool. Ooh, that sounds kind of nice. Ooh, I might like that, right? It's like he's kind of like, it's almost like he's getting a taste test, right? It feels more like he's a judge on one of those Food Network shows where everybody brings him this food, this course that they spent an hour slaving over and sweating and everything else, and the judges kind of like eat a couple bites. We're like, it was good. Oh yeah, I like it. Could use a little more salt, right? That's kind of Pliable's attitude. There's no depth to what he's hearing. It sounds good, but it's not really happening. Okay. Now Christian continues. Who else is going to be there? He asks. Christian says, well, there shall be seraphims and cherubims, creatures that dazzle your eyes to look on them. There also you shall meet with thousands and 10,000s that have gone before us to that place. None of them are hurtful, but loving and holy, everyone walking in the sight of God and standing in his presence with the acceptance forever. In a word, there we shall see the elders with their golden crowns. There we shall see the holy virgins and their golden harps. There we shall see men that by the world were cut in pieces, burnt in flames, eaten of beasts, drowned in the seas, for the love that they bear to the Lord of the place, all well and clothed with immortality as with a garment. Okay? Now, that's a great summary of a lot of verses, okay? A lot of what he's seen in Isaiah 6, a lot of what he's seen in Revelation, but John tried desperately to describe in human terms of this divine picture that he's seeing, okay? He's seeing saints, he's seeing redeemed saints, he's seeing martyrs that have been brought back to life and made whole again. He's seeing cherubim, seraphim, crowns, all this kind of stuff. Now, in this beautiful picture that we see, what do we not see? is there something missing from Christian's viewpoint? Christ. Do you see what's not seen? He has all these cool pictures of heaven. We could replace it in our time with wings and harps and everything else, right? Whatever your terms want to be. His is a little more biblical. But the point being, it doesn't really matter how biblical it is because it's missing the point. What are the seraphim and the cherubim? What are they surrounding? The throne. What are all these creatures that he just listed? What are they doing? If you remember your Bible. Worshipping around the throne. Right? What are these crowns? What is happening to these crowns? They're being thrown at the feet of Jesus. Do you see all the things that he's not saying? Right? This gets back to our point about Christian. He doesn't have a complete view yet. What he sees is glorious. What he's not seeing yet is the difference between him being saved and him not being saved. Okay? Make sense? All right. The hearing of this place is pliable, is enough to ravish one's heart. But are these things to be enjoyed? How shall we get to be sharers thereof? There's his question for the first time. Great. The Lord, the governor of the country, hath recorded that in this book, the sustenance of which, if we truly be willing to have it, he will bestow upon us freely. Now, that again may not strike us in a Protestant church, but that was a huge, huge deal. Because who's the bestower of the blessing? In his time, it was the Pope, for some. In the Protestants, though, it was God directly. So you come by faith to him. And, more importantly, how willing is he to grant it? Isaiah 55, Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Yes, come buy wine and milk, without money, without price. Why do you spend your money on things that don't last? Right? So Bunyan's basically saying, God is sitting with open hands waiting for us to come and put faith in him. It's freely available to anyone. Don't worry about sacraments. Don't worry about communion. Don't worry about blessings from the Pope. Don't worry about acceptance into the church. Don't worry about the Archbishop of Canterbury. Don't worry about the prayer book. Just come. If you're willing to take by faith what's in this book, God is more than willing to give it out to you freely. Again, that may not strike us. That's incredibly important in his time. There was no intervening organization. You and God, that's what it boils down to. Is there more to the church? Of course. That's not what he's saying. What he is saying when it comes to faith, it's you and God. And later on, we'll see as we talk to ignorance and others, when you stand at judgment, it's just you and God. Make sense? All right. Now, Christian paints this beautiful picture for Pliable. And Pliable says the hearing of it is enough to ravish one's heart. And he says, you can have this freely. Isn't that beautiful? We already said Pliable is not exactly the deepest person in the world. Now, does Christian have any blame in that?
She's not giving the why of what the kingdom is for. It's just kind of there with these great things, but there's no meaning to it.
Yeah, do you see what's happening? Christian's not giving any of the background. He says, God's willing to give this all to you if you just come to him by faith. That's great. Is there no cost to this? Is there really nothing that you have to give up? It's just there waiting for you and you don't have to worry about a single thing? He's not being honest with the terrors that remain. He's not being honest with what it means to come to faith. He's not being honest with what God expects because there is no God and this throne is missing. He's talking about all the benefits, but he's not talking about any of the costs. So to a degree, Pliable is he's a useless character. You'll find out. You're going to hate him. Okay? But Christian, to his part, isn't exactly filling in all the blanks for him. He's not giving him a complete picture.
So once Christian knows, then he is responsible to communicate.
He's responsible to communicate, but at this point we're seeing as a whole in his understanding, and perhaps an understandable but still problematic explanation of what he's seeing.
Yeah, so he doesn't communicate what he doesn't know.
But he does know some of it, right? Because he's not concentrating on the terrors that he knows. He's only concentrating on the good things. Now, why would he want that? Why would he only tell Pliable about the good things?
Well, it's easier to draw someone in with.
And what does he desperately want after his children leave him and his parents leave him and his neighbors leave him and obstinate leaves him? Just a friend, like you guys pointed out before. I just want one friend. And if this keeps you, I'm quite happy. We'll keep going together. At least I'll have somebody. We'll get to the negative stuff later. Right now, we'll just talk about the good stuff.
Don't you think, too, he was such a rule, underneath the curse of rules and everything, that he kind of went from one side to the other?
It's possible. It's possible that Christian was only kind of a legalist, and so now he was so worried about rules before that now he switched over to grace. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think it's just simply the fact that partly he doesn't understand, and partly he just wants a friend. And this is keeping Pliable close, and so he's more than happy. But Campos says modern evangelism is often too willing to rush people to the cross before they are, by God's grace, ready and able to appreciate its worth. Okay, so we have to do better than that. Christian shows a hole in his knowledge. All right, Pliable says, "Well, my good companion, glad I am to hear these things. Come on, let us mend our pace." And Christian says, "I cannot go so fast as I would by reason of this burden that is on my back." Now, he says, let's mend our pace. Means let's go a little faster. Let's pick it up. Let's get going. Right? Now, on the surface, does that sound good?
Yeah.
Why? Why does that sound good?
Because you get to the good stuff quicker.
Yeah, because it gets to the good stuff quicker. But what is it also, if you just share the gospel and somebody's like, "Wow, that's awesome. I'm ready to go." Does that get you excited? Why not?
Yes.
Why doesn't that get you excited?
Well, in this case, Pliable doesn't know the whole story.
Right.
He at least doesn't know the flip side of glory.
Right.
And so the fact that he wants to go there doesn't mean that he has a saving knowledge. It doesn't mean anything except he wants to go to the county fair.
You're right. He wants to go to the county fair. We don't know exactly what he's running to, but what do we get really excited about? When we have the term in our current day and age of a decision for Christ, we have altar calls, which actually aren't really new. They go back quite a bit. But what was the excitement? We see it on tele-evangelism. Everyone's doing it, and what do we assume is happening? If everyone's excited, then everyone's interested. We assume that someone's enthusiasm is the pathway to faith. And so we get people hyped up. We get people excited. We tell them things that they want to hear so that it looks like they're really softened, right? We'll show them movie clips from modern movies that illustrate some small little random biblical point because people get really interested. And now I've got their attention. Now they're ready to hear the gospel. But are they? Is that really what's happening? Pliable says, let's mend the pace, let's hurry up. But what is he running towards? To Mike's point, what is he running towards? He's really excited, even though there's nothing really there. Does that make sense? So he wants to hurry up, and he has this enthusiasm, and he wants to pick up the pace because he's got nothing to lose. While Christian, on the other hand, says, I can't go any faster because I've got a burden. What Pliable's really doing when he turns to Christian and says, let's mend the pace, is, why are you going so slow? What's your problem? Why can't we go a little faster? Let's pick it up a little bit. Come on, let's go. Step 2. Move it, move it, move it, right? We're just listening to Mary Poppins. Step in time, right? You've seen the movie. It's a good one. The new one will not, I'm just convinced, it will not be near as good as Julie Andrews in the original, okay? But he says, let's go. Let's move a little faster. And Christian says, I can't move any faster because I've got this burden on my back. Now, Pliable doesn't get it. He says, why aren't you moving a little faster? And Christian says, do you not see this? Can you not feel this? You don't feel it, but you want to move faster. His excitement is just enthusiasm for nothing. Okay? They haven't really considered their own heart. He really isn't worried about it. Christian, on the other hand, has a burden of guilt and sin that he can't escape. Pliable has nothing to lose, so he's ready to run. And now I saw in my dream that just as they had ended this talk, they drew near to a very miry slough that was in the midst of the plain. And they, being heedless, did both fall suddenly into the bog. The name of the slough was Despond. Here, therefore, they wallowed for a time, being grievously bedaubed with the dirt. And Christian, because of the burden that was on his back, began to sink in the mire. Now, there's a lot there, actually. First of all, slough. The Slough of Despond, just totally aside, actually became a cultural kind of, not a phenomenon, but a cultural term. So you actually see it in The Great Gatsby and a lot of other places where he refers to certain people falling into the Slough of Despond, being a state of depression. So Bunyan actually coined this term. He actually also coined Vanity Fair, but we'll get to that later. Now, what is a slough? A bog. What is a bog? Mud. Keep going, though. Mud and water. Stuck. What's that? Vegetation.
Nothing grows.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah,
Lot grows.
It's camouflage.
It's camouflage. It's like a swamp, quicksand. If you take all that together, the modern geological term is a fen. Would be a closer thing to it. What we call a fen. And what it is this wetland or swamp. And what happens is the water, it's usually in a low-lying area where everything kind of drains into this area, into this one place. And it saturates the ground to the point where it won't sink into the ground anymore. It just stays on the surface. But the ground underneath it, it's not deep. We're not talking a lake. This is just kind of a swampland area. And so you can walk into it, but what happens, the water starts to settle, which then means algae and stuff starts growing on top of it, which is what camouflages it, right? So as they're walking, they're not just sitting there and they're like, oh, hey, water, let's just keep going, and they just keep walking straight ahead. They don't see what's coming, okay? But they were heedless, which means that they could have seen what's coming, but they were too busy with their head in the clouds to realize where God was taking them. And so they just walked straight into the slough. Now, that being said, when you have a ground that's full of clay and you put a lot of water into it, what do you get? You get what? Almost. But it stays wet, and so it becomes a really quick-acting cement that never quite dries up. And it's this sucking kind of like quicksand-ish kind of stuff. Make sense? So there's actually a place near Bedfordshire where this happened. So Bunyan used to walk by all the time and see this place because they had one real close by. And what happens is if you walked in, you could get stuck. The kind of place where, you know, in the movies or in the cartoons, they get stuck and they have to pull their foot out of and their shoe stays in, but their foot comes out of their shoe. That's the idea. Okay? They're getting stuck in this mire, and it's not just a simple walk out. It took work. It was hard. Okay? And they went headlong into it. Now, as Bunyan describes this, into a very miry slough. It was really sticky. And it was in the midst of the plain. And they fell into the bog. The name of the slough is Despond. Here, therefore, they wallowed for a time, being grievously bedaubed. That means as they sat there, as they fell in, and they were trying to get out, but the more they struggled, the more of this dirt and mud and clay and everything else is getting on top of them. Okay? Now, this is kind of a tough picture. This is the slough, the mud, the mire of despond or despondency. Okay? What is despondency? Aloof. Keep going. It's more than aloofness. Aloofness has a bit of an ignorance, sort of an innocent factor. Despondency is a little bit different. When someone is despondent, well, typically when do you see someone that's despondent? When you're in shock or depressed or something else, right? When something's hit the system and you're struggling to deal with it. But is this a shock in the sense of I'm so overwhelmed and excited that tears of joy are flowing from me? No, despondency is kind of a depression. It's almost like a giving up. It's I'm stuck in this situation and I don't know what to do about it. That's when you become despondent. You start shutting off to the point of aloofness. You start kind of just sort of leaving everything else, and you're just kind of by yourself. It's a dangerous place to be in. Okay, it's very dangerous because you will start closing in. You're this little bubble, and your bubble just keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and nobody's allowed in but you. Okay?
Is it kind of a hopeless feeling?
Yes, very much a
You're
hopeless
not trying
feeling.
to get out, you're just kind of
Yeah.
giving up.
It's very much a hopeless situation. At least in your own mind, it's a hopeless situation.
Because you can get out.
Sometimes you
It's
can.
difficult.
Yep.
You can't.
But Jason, doesn't that come over time? Especially when you was a spouse and you at first everything is fine, people are coming around you, and all of a sudden,
Yep.
people start falling away, and you're not comfortable in your apartment. All of a sudden, you get comfortable in your apartment. Now it's like I just enjoy being in my apartment, and somebody comes by and say, "Don't come."
Yep. Yeah, again, this is not necessarily something that has to be a sudden thing. This is something that as they went in there, and then Bunyan says, then they got stuck. So they fell into this state, and then they couldn't escape from it. Does that make sense? So that could be a long time, that could be a short time. Now, what's very, very challenging about this situation, because we will talk about a Christian going through depression when we get to the giant despair and the doubting castle, quite a ways from now. So just don't worry about that one. What's challenging about this scenario is this is somebody who's getting stuck in this despondency, but that's not a Christian. You see how we're before the gate. So Bunyan's viewing this idea that Christian and pliable are walking, they fall into this bog, they can't get out, they're stuck, and it says a Christian is starting to sink because of the burden on his back. So what is this despondency over? This isn't just simply my situation kind of bites.
At a practical level, where my cousin is, this is paralleling what's happening in his life. Mm-hmm. The ladies in our book study had said that he's actually knows to take seriously enough the decision that's to come. Mm-hmm. So he's actually counting the cost of what he's going to decide. But counting the cost means giving up.
Right.
The sin patterns, the habits, the world, and all of that. And that, I don't know.
So it could be that he's counting the cost of what he knows the truth, but does he want to embrace the truth?
Yeah.
Right. So it's somewhat that, but what's sinking Christian?
The burden of sin.
The burden. Not the burden of sin, the burden of guilt. Okay? Because if you say it's a burden of sin, then when the burden rolls off in a couple of scenes later, he should be sinless, right? But that's not the case. This is the burden of guilt. So this guilt over his sin is what's sinking Christian further and further into this despondency. Okay? But he's before the cross. So what is Bunyan trying to picture? He's picturing people that start this journey. And as they go out, they have an understanding of what their sin is like. And they understand the guilt of their sin. And they understand that there's condemnation coming. And judgment is somewhere out there. And something bad is going to happen because of the sin that I've committed. They get that. And what that does is it sinks them into despondency or depression. And as they sit there in the depression, they don't just sit there and clean themselves up. They get more and more bedaubed with the dirt. They realize more and more their sin. They keep navel gazing. They keep looking at their own belly button. They realize what's wrong with them, and then they remind themselves what's wrong with them. And then they remind themselves that they already reminded themselves what's wrong with them, right? And so they're just sinking further and further into this depression. And they're really stuck. But this brings up two questions. Number one, both Christian and pliable fall into this muck. But only one of them has a burden. So what does that tell us? And second, how can a Christian fall into this muck and get stuck? Okay, so those two questions. We're going to answer as we go going through. All right, one more section. We're going to try to get through it. Then said pliable, neighbor Christian, where are you now? Truly, said Christian, I do not know. Okay? Because what did pliable, whether partly because, it's his own personality and partly because of what Christian told him, what was pliable's expectation? Good things coming soon. Quickly. This journey is going to be great. Because listen to what did you tell me? Well, back there was a lot of judgment, Pliable. But where we're going, cherubim, seraphims, crowns, glory, fun, no more sorrow. This is awesome. This is going to be great. God's good. Isn't it wonderful? Let's go. God's got a purpose for my life. I'm just excited. And so they start heading out, and now they start to find out that sin kind of entangles. The sin is right there. So as you read from the book, what's happening to Pliable? Well, he fell in. He fell into this despondency that comes with sin. So what is Bunyan telling us that Pliable felt?
Betrayal.
Betrayal? Because what is he feeling in this dirt? A little bit, just a little bit of guilt. He's a little bit depressed about sin. He gets the idea of sin. That's what this is picturing. This is picturing Pliable running in there. He falls into the muck. He gets this dirt on him. He understands why he should be depressed. He understands that he is dirty and that he is a sinner. I get it. Okay? But he asks Christian, where are you? I don't know. And this is what Pliable's response is. At that, Pliable began to be offended. What? You didn't tell me about this. You didn't tell me about sin. You didn't tell me about guilt. You didn't tell me about judgment. You just told me about the good things. I can't believe you didn't tell me about this. Angrily said to his fellow, is this the happiness you told me all this while of? If we have such ill speed at our first setting out, what may we expect betwixt this and our journey's end? May I get out again with my life, you shall possess the brave country alone for me. If this is how bad it is now, I can't imagine how much worse it's going to get the rest of the way. Now, is that true? Yeah, actually, Pliable is actually dead on, right? Now, why is Pliable faithless? What is Pliable missing? A burden. But what is Pliable missing about the journey? Because he is correct with his assessment that it only gets harder from here on out. But what is Pliable missing?
He didn't have the book.
He didn't have the book, and so what else? As we go through life, what's the difference between you and an unbelieving coworker? They go to work, you go to work. They try to get a promotion, you're trying to get a promotion. They lose loved ones, you lose loved ones. You're getting older, they're getting older.
There is no hope.
There is no hope. Because there's nothing bigger. There is no Christ in their life. And so as they walk through the same situations as you, the thing that makes you different isn't the circumstances. It's how you deal with the circumstances. Does that make sense? Be ready to give a defense for the hope that lies within you, is what Peter says. Now, when he says that, he's not saying that you're in such a dramatically different situation than everyone else that you're just going to stick out like a sore thumb. No, what he is saying is, you're in the same situation as everybody else, and yet somehow you have hope. You're not getting stuck. You're not slowing down. You have something bigger in your life. What makes the difference, as we have our leadership meeting this week, as the deacons and the elders get together, the difference between that and a board meeting in a business is this is just an organization. This is God's organization. These are just men getting together to talk business. These are God's servants getting together and God superintending to bring these men together. That's the church. The church is just not a social organization. It is God's people joining together to fellowship, to share, to meet, to love. Does that make sense? There is a third party, if you will, in the church that doesn't exist necessarily in other organizations that dramatically changes the outcome. I'm not saying God isn't everywhere. I'm just saying in terms of organizations, a church is fundamentally different than a business because there is an X factor, so to speak. Okay? And that's what Pliable's missing. Pliable looks and says it only gets harder from here. You are absolutely right. The difference is there is a God that's sovereign, that controls everything, that has power to overcome and has overcome, and he's superintending this entire race that you run. So yes, you're right, it gets difficult, but the grace increases as the difficulty increases, if that makes sense. So, Pliable's offended. I can't believe you did this. Fine, I'm done. And with that, he gave a desperate struggle or two and got out of the mire on that side of the slough, which was next to his own house. So away he went, and Christian saw him no more. Now, so Pliable gets out. How hard was it for him to get out? Not too hard. A couple of desperate struggles and he's done. On the side, that was near his own house. So what does that tell you about how far he went? Not very far. And he could get out. So it probably wasn't that deep for him, right? So let's think about Pliable. Where is he at? He gets out near his own house. He never really believed. He never was really serious about making progress. And so he never got very far. Okay? The burden never sunk him because he never had it. Now, as he leaves, though, what happened to him while he was in there? What did they get covered in? Now, as he gets out of the mire, do we read that he got a shower? No. So what does he carry with him as he gets out of this mire? Yeah. It's the worst possible situation. Okay? Being in this slough is one of the worst possible situations for any man or woman. Because what you're really saying is, you get stuck in this slough. You know about judgment. You feel the guilt of your sin. You know something bad's going to happen. The problem is, you're not making progress. You get stuck in this slough and you stop. And you just stay. And you just stay depressed about you. And you know you're a sinner. And you know that you have problems. But you won't go any further to get to the cross. But you also know enough that you don't want to go back to the city of destruction because it's only sin there. So where does that leave you? In probably one of the most depressing states that any human being can be in. You know, to your point, Brenda, you know the cost of your sin, but you don't want to embrace the cross. Now, is this a real place that people can come to? I absolutely guarantee it. This is the person that comes up after every sermon and says, oh, I know I'm a sinner, but what shall I do? And they're given the advice, come to the cross, believe in Jesus. I just don't know if he'll have me. And then the next week, what do? Oh, I know I'm a sinner, what should I do? I know you told me last week I should come to Jesus. Come to Jesus. I don't know, I just don't know. And this is a cycle. And there are people that will come through this, and they will spend most of their life just in this cycle. This close, but no closer. Does that make sense? And they're depressed. And it's tough. And it's tough to keep telling them over and over again about the cross. Because you don't know when God's going to do something, if he's going to do something. But it's tough. And what Bunyan's saying is there are people that head out on the journey that understand the guilt of sin, but never progress further than that. They stop. And even those that seem excited, once they learn about sin, that's it. They're done.